we're going to take a closer look at ATP, which remember is the usable form of energy or the usable energy source for the cell. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So you can see why it's shortened to ATP to make things a little bit easier. And ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is the source of energy in the cell. So the cell by far and away prefers all its energy to come from adenosine triphosphate. Now adenosine triphosphate is actually part of a cycle which is constantly breaking down and reforming inside of the cell to be able to provide energy for the cell and then to be able to reform into ATP to be able to provide energy again. So we'll take a look at that shortly. If I try and draw a very rough kind of diagram of ATP, you'll see that there's three main components that make up this molecule and give it its name. So firstly we have an adenine base, we have a ribose sugar, and we have these three things here which are phosphate groups, phosphates. So we can see that we have adenosine from the adenine base, and we have the triphosphate from the fact that we have 1, 2, 3 phosphates. Now, what you'll notice is that I've drawn in the bond between the second and the third phosphate. I've drawn that bond in with a bit of a squiggly line, and there's a reason for that. It's because this bond is weak and it's easily broken. So the way in which a cell uses ATP to be able to gain energy is it breaks this bond between the second and third phosphate groups, and we get the release of energy, and then it's that released energy which is able to be put towards different processes within the cell. So how do we come about getting ATP in the first place? So if we remember a cell respiration equation, we have C6H12O6, which is a glucose, and 6 oxygens being broken down into 6 carbon dioxides, six water molecules, and some energy. So remember, the energy is being released because glucose here, it's quite a complex molecule with lots of bonds, and those bonds being broken apart is going to create some energy, will create an energy release. Now, this is where we come to the ATP cycle. So ATP, adenosine triphosphate, I'll write it in there, adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate is constantly in the cell being broken down and turned into ADP plus P. So this is adenosine diphosphate plus a phosphate. So if you've seen written anywhere ATP becoming ADP plus P, it's when adenosine triphosphate is broken down into ADP plus P, adenosine diphosphate, plus an extra phosphate group. Now this ADP plus P can be rebonded together to reform ATP. So the way in which ATP becomes ADP plus P, if we go back up to our original diagram here, remember we have this weak, easily broken bond here between 2 and 3. Now if this bond, if I just remove this stuff here, if this bond is broken, then you can now see what we've got. What we are left with is an ADP, a P here, and then we get this energy release from that bond that was once formed. Now going back to our cycle here, when ATP is being broken down to ADP plus P, we call this the breakdown of the molecule. The reason why we want to see a breakdown of this molecule is to release energy for our things like active transport, which requires an energy input, and also reactions. So if we have some things reacting, we need some energy to keep them going, to make them happen, then this is where the energy will come from, this breaking down of ATP to ADP plus P. Now we can also have synthesis of this ATP molecule. So the ADP and the P are going to be able to be rejoined to create ATP. And this comes about as a result of cell respiration. So the energy we end up with here from cell respiration is used to reform the bond between the second and the third phosphate groups. So we are able to return ADP and P to being ATP. So you can see how this is a constantly reoccurring cycle. So the reason why ATP is such a good source of energy for our cell is because it has a bond between phosphate groups that can be easily broken to release energy for use in the cell, but then it can be reformed and recycled through gaining energy from cell respiration to be reformed in its full entirety of ATP, and then can be reused again.